Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Greg George, President and CEO of ABC Western Michigan. I want to thank you all for joining us for today's Informing the Industry webinar as we explore the significant updates to Michigan's energy code, which is set to start being enforced on April 22nd. These changes are going to bring both challenges and opportunities for the commercial construction industry. And one of the most noticeable updates is the requirement of functional performance testing. Today, we are pleased to have Eric DeVries, President of E3M Solutions, with us. He's going to share valuable insights on FPT and discuss other updates in the regulatory landscape. Eric is happy to take questions at the end. If you have some burning ones that are pertinent, shoot them in the chat, and we'll try to address them as they come along. Eric, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity to connect. Thanks to everybody for joining. It's always different presenting in a webinar format. I can't get any immediate feedback from the room. So as Greg mentioned, if you have burning questions, please feel free to shoot those into the chat, and then Greg or Lindsay will interrupt, and we'll try to address those right away. So as Greg mentioned, why are we here, right? Why are we here, and why are you listening to me? We are here because in a little over 25 days, the state of Michigan is starting enforcement of a new energy code that affects all commercial construction. And why are you listening to me? I've actually had the privilege we'll go with, and the opportunity to be on the Michigan Energy Code Advisory Council for the last 3 years. So I've been working alongside Eagle in reviewing the ASHRAE codes, reviewing what our current Michigan Energy Code is. Do we adopt? Do we amend anything out? What changes do we make? So while this is coming pretty rapidly on us in about 30 days here, I have actually been working through this for about 2 to 3 years with the state and with Eagle in preparations for this adoption. So I have a little bit of back knowledge. So I'm gonna figure out why that won't click. There we go. One thing I'm gonna quick disclaimer. I am obviously an engineer. I'm on the advisory council. I originally gave a presentation on this about 3 hours. We're going to condense that down to about an hour today. So not every piece of information is going to be represented on a slide. And ultimately, as everyone knows on this call and everyone at ABC recognizes, the AHJ, the local code official, kind of has the final say of what they're going to enforce or if they're going to allow something to slide or not. And we're going to discuss a couple things pertinent to a couple larger municipalities in West Michigan that are already making some temporary revisions to this. We're going to dive right into it. What is changing? So for the last 6 years, we have been under an energy code of ASHRAE 90.1 2013. On April 22, we will begin enforcement of ASHRAE 90.1 2019. What happens with that jump is everything that is contained within ASHRAE 90.1 2016, that code is also adopted. So part of the challenge, part of the opportunity for ABC members is the fact that we're not just jumping one revision, we're essentially jumping two. So that needs, sometimes then things have evolved further. We need to kind of be aware of what's in both books. The first question we often get asked is, what is the impact? I'm going to talk to that. I'm going to very much caveat, this is not my study. The ASHRAE and the U.S. Department of Energy commissions the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory to review what impact do they see on these code changes happening. And this is what they published. So what is the impact on energy savings? They're showing about an 18-cent on average per square foot for a commercial building, and a reduction in energy costs, annual energy costs, as a result of these code changes for a code minimum building. That's pretty significant. If you're looking at a commercial office building under the 2013 code, maybe we were $1.10 a square foot as an annual energy cost to a commercial office building. Now they're saying we're dropping down to close to 90 cents a square foot. It's a pretty significant reduction. What that comes, though, is at a little bit of a cost. And what's interesting is Pacific Northwest National Laboratory did this study prior to what we've all seen and seen happen since COVID, inflation, right? So they projected about a 95 cent a square foot reduction in construction costs as this code. I can tell you, and we all know, there's no way that's accurate. With inflation, with everything that has gone on in the last couple of years, and now with tariffs and potential more inflation coming in the next month, 6 months, whatever that might be, this is adding cost. I did some research as part of the Code Council, but also since the adoption of this, talking to Colorado, talking to Minnesota, talking to a few other states, design professionals and contractors that have already adopted this. What they're saying is they're seeing about a 1 to 3% increase in total construction cost for a project relative to these code changes. So to do easy math, because I'm an engineer, I don't have a spreadsheet in front of me. If we got a $10 million, a $10 million project, they're saying you might see a 100 to $300,000 increase on that $10 million project directly associated with things that are required in this code update. Obviously, we all know a $10 million project 2 years ago is not a $10 million project now. So this is in addition and outside of inflation. What's interesting with that, though, is that last slide presented everything holistically across the board. That study by the Northwest National Laboratory is about a 30-page document. It does go in and break down to different building types, different use types. So they're saying, you're seeing more of an energy savings in a primary K through 12 school than you are in a large office building, or you're seeing more cost impact to a hotel than you are to a small office building, because certain things impact different building types and different use types in different ways. If you're really enthralled by this, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. We can talk through the different use types, or you can look up those studies, but there's about 30 pages in each of those studies. All right, we're going to dive into what are the big changes in ASHRAE 90.1 2019. First thing I like to talk about is, when does this code apply? This is the same, and it has been this way for the last 6 years, but and before that. But just a reminder, anytime you're building a new building, anytime you're putting on a building addition, most alterations to existing buildings are governed by this. An exemption will be an historical building. Most historical buildings are not going to be required to follow this energy code. Other than that, and one big change that we'll talk about in a couple sections is there were a fair bit of exemptions under the 2013 code that we've been under for the last 6 years, allowing certain projects or certain scopes of work to not have to comply with this code. And this adoption of 2019 has pretty much closed all of those loopholes, and you pretty well have to comply with this code. All right. Well, the second part that I like to bring up is there's still two compliance methods. Most, I would say 95, 98% of projects in West Michigan and in Michigan in general follow the prescriptive compliance path. There's different sections that 5 through 10 there. If you have this, you need to be at this efficiency, or you need to do this. I need to do this, 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 and this. If I can do all these things, I comply. There's a majority of projects. What most people, including some AHJs, haven't even recognized for the last 6 years is that there is an alternative path. It's called the energy cost budget method. Additions that can't comply. It's really hard to add an addition to a building and say, hey, how do I bring the whole building up to code? Or, hey, I want to do a high-rise building that wants to have more glass than maybe what Section 5 allows. You can do trade-offs. The energy cost budget method is essentially a way to trade off energy efficiency of other systems to maybe sacrifice a little bit of performance on certain systems. So like to bring this to people's attention, because even in 6 years since this came out in the 2013 code, a lot of people still haven't recognized that this is available. All right, I am going to beat a drum today. You guys are going to get sick of me talking about it, but it's the biggest change, and I try to mark it with this little icon in a couple areas. And the biggest change in 90.1 2019 that'll go into enforcement in about 30 days is the fact that functional performance testing and commissioning becomes required for essentially all projects. So functional performance testing is required for all buildings, all projects, regardless of size. We're going to dive into some of the requirements of individual systems, but functional performance testing is a scaled back version of full-on commissioning. It removes some different early requirements in the design phase. It removes some site inspection requirements, but it ultimately, functional performance testing is a focus on, does the system operate and function the way it's supposed to as designed when the project is completed? So an example, you've got a outdoor air economizer to bring in fresh air and provide free cooling on an HVAC unit. Functional performance testing, as you simulate the conditions that make sure that that damper opens, the fresh air comes in, it closes at the temperature it's supposed to, all of that. You're essentially going system by system and verifying it's operating the way it's intended to. Any building 10,000 square feet or larger flips into a commissioning requirement. So I think a lot of us have started to become familiar with commissioning over the last handful of years. ASHRAE's is slightly different than like a LEED commissioning. There is some different parts and pieces to it. Some exemptions to that are dwellings. So if you build a apartment, high-rise apartment or a high-rise condo, you have to commission their central systems. You have to commission your corridors, your common areas, but you don't have to do the individual dwelling unit. Another exemption to the commissioning requirement is a non-refrigerated warehouse. So if you are, that's not manufacturing, I want to be very clear on that. If it's a manufacturing process that's heated and cooled, that requires commissioning. But if you have a storage warehouse that's not refrigerated, that's also an exemption. So there are other small exemptions by section, but be aware that this is the biggest change in this code and has the most impact. What we are hearing from Colorado, from Minnesota, is roughly about a quarter of a percent to a half a percent of total construction cost is going to end up being in some sort of commissioning, functional performance testing. What is interesting for a lot of the caller or people on the call today is there is a component of that that is required in the design phase and in the construction phase. So probably the most frequently asked question we get, who carries this cost? Where does this get done? We're going to jump into that a little bit. The code does a better job of defining who can provide this testing. And then we're going to talk about how that gets bid. They define who can do the testing or commissioning. They define very clearly an independent third party. So I'm going to XYZ general contractor is bidding this project. They can hire an E3M or somebody else to be the functional performance testing and commissioning agent. What can also happen is you get a design team with the design side. Maybe an architect is designing a project. They have in-house engineering. They can hire an independent party to provide the functional performance testing, commissioning plan, and requirements associated with the design. The second qualified party that they say can do this is an owner's qualified employee. Talking with Colorado and a couple other professionals, the best example of this is, let's say you're going to do a boiler project at a college, and the college has a certified boiler operator on staff. They run and manage that boiler plant every single day. The contractor can come in, provide the retrofit, put all the new boiler system in, do all that kind of stuff. The owner's qualified employee, that boiler operator, can come in and run that system through its paces and verify that it's working. Most owners that I have talked to that have gone through this process, they're shying away from this, saying, I still want somebody else to say we're getting what we're supposed to get. The last one, the last person that can provide this is an individual from the design firm or contractor not directly associated with the design or install. So I'm going to use Greg as an example from ABC. Let's say Greg and I we're part of the same company, right? We work together. If I design the project and I oversee submittals and construction management and all that kind of stuff, I am the one directly associated. Greg can come in as a not associated, even though we work for the same firm, and run the system through its paces. We're finding from other states that a lot of owners are a little hesitant of this. The reason being, you have it right. If I screw something up and Greg calls it out, and it costs our company money, people are going to be hesitant to maybe call that out. Where this does work really well, and a lot of other states are recommending this works very well, is in you have more of your unit replacement. I go back to that boiler example, right? You replace 3 boilers at a school. A service technician comes in, runs it through its paces. You don't have to necessarily have an independent third party come in and commission just a boiler system. The third party is often brought up when you're brand new build, you're a full system, you're a full building, because there's just a lot more systems going on and you're not getting each individual contractor to try to commission their own system. As I mentioned before, right? There's a section of this. It's about 30 to 40% of the overall scope of a functional performance testing and commissioning plan that has to happen prior to permit, right? There's going to be changes on drawings. You're going to see book specs. You're going to see sheet specs for projects that are starting to have commissioning plans and requirements included on even down to a rooftop replacement project. So there's a piece of that that has to happen prior to design or during design prior to permitting. There is additionally a fair bit that comes at the end with a preliminary report and a final report. So the question comes back to who carries this? How does this get done? What we're seeing from other states is really 2 main approaches. One is either an owner recognizes this, and when the requirement for this, they're educated of this requirement, and when they hire an architect or a design build firm from the beginning, they're going to make a professional services agreement that at minimum covers the design, right? The requirements for an FPT plan and commissioning plan to be done as part of a professional service agreement up front. From there, you have 2 options. One is that contract, that professional services agreement can flow with that person or professional all the way through to the completion. Or once it's done with the plan and the project goes out for permitting and bids, it is then picked up and carried by a general contractor, the mechanical contractor, the electrical contractor, whatever contractor may be completing that project. Talking with Minnesota, talking with Colorado, those other states, it's about a 50-50 split right now in the way people are approaching this. Does the owner hire a professional to carry this all the way through to completion, or do they hire it for the design phase as a professional services agreement and then push it to the contractor to carry it through to final commissioning and completion? Either way that it's approached, the big thing with this is AHJs are being trained by the state of Michigan that they need a document that states the functional performance testing or commissioning was completed and signed off on prior to issuing a C of O. So if you want to go to certificate of occupancy, you want to move into that building, you want to get that school ready in August to move into for the school year to start, you've got to have this done. So for any general contractors, any pre-construction people that are on this call, you've got to recognize and you got to start planning into your project schedules that you need time to have this testing completed, any deficiencies corrected before you can submit for your C of O. What we're hearing and what we're seeing is I think there's going to, just like we have before, there's going to be TCOs, there's going to be temporary occupancies to get people into buildings, but to get a final occupancy, this is going to be something that's required. That's at a high level. That's covering the biggest change, general requirement that's in section 4, the 90.1 2019. From here, and kind of for the next 20-25 minutes, I'm going to dive into building envelope. I'm going to dive into mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, and some other systems. Again, as I mentioned, we're not going to get into super depth on a lighting controls requirement, but we're going to talk about some of the changes. And if you want to understand more, dive into the code book or reach out to myself. I'm happy to walk through it with you. All right, so the biggest change for building envelope. We start talking to the architects, the general trades on the call that are building the building envelope itself. There are two approaches to how to generate and develop a functional performance testing plan or commissioning plan around building envelope. The first one is a whole building air leak test. One of these. It is pressurizing a building to a certain static pressure and verifying that you are not above a certain allowable CFM. This is very straightforward. It's black and white. However, it's really difficult, right? If you're getting towards final occupancy and you're pressure testing your envelope and you're failing, it's really difficult to go back and open up walls, tear down drywall, figure out, right? You're chasing a needle in a haystack, trying to figure out where your air leaks are. That's a problem. So they do offer an alternative compliance path, which I don't necessarily outline on a slide, but they offer the ability to develop a plan that during the design phase, you have a trained professional on building envelopes, review the documents, make sure the plan for continuous air barriers, for insulation, for how details are called out, that your MEP trades, when they penetrate the envelope, how that needs to be sealed. You have a qualified professional review the documents and make sure it's all up to plan. And then they can systematically and regularly walk a construction site during the project that they're essentially verifying and signing off on that the documents are being followed in terms of how the project's being built. So that's the two approaches to kind of building envelope. One is blower door testing, which has been required for a little while now on residential buildings. But I jump back a slide here. It's got to be 0.0 CFM per square foot at a pressure of 3 inches of water column. This is called out, and I got very technical there. And the first bullet point here I want to bring up, this has to be an independent third party. So if you're a general trades or general contractor on this call, you can't just go out and buy a blower door kit and say, I'm going to test my own buildings. This, by the code, has to be an independent third party. Same as you kind of get into, it's required the same as you go the alternative compliance path. If you have the design professional review the documents, walk the site regularly, and sign off on the construction, this is one that those three categories I talked about earlier of third party, owner's representative, or not directly associated with the design or construction, anything with envelope has to be an independent party. Saw a question pop in. I'm going to pause just briefly to see if I can see that. The building envelope test, does that require, or is that required for new builds only? So it is technically required for any building improvement that you're modifying the building fenestration, right? The building envelope, the fenestration. That's part of the reason the alternative compliance path exists. Because let's say you put an addition on a building, it's really hard to independently test only the addition. So that's where they give you the method of, let's review the documents, let's have a party walk through and verify that we're adding to the construction well. The question always gets, well, what if I'm not touching the envelope? Or what if I'm only replacing some windows? There are sections and categories where you're not getting into the full in the code, and you can see on this screen 5.4.3.1.1, right? We're pretty deep into code sections here. There are exemptions. If you're just replacing windows, you got to make sure the windows comply. You don't have to test the full building. So there are, Wes, to your question, it is written that it's every project. The compliance path in which you take to approach that compliance is going to be dependent. I don't think in a renovation or an addition, doing a whole building air leak test with a blower door is all that feasible. So hopefully I answered that, Wes. I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards if you have more question there, but great question. All right, so I'm gonna jump into mechanical. So this is a big change that I kind of mentioned earlier. So, right, under the 2013 code, the code that we're currently abiding by, if you did a direct equipment replacement, so if you took a rooftop off of a building and put a rooftop back that's like for like, you did not have to meet all of the requirements of the energy code. You just had to meet a minimum equipment efficiency. What has changed in the 2019 code is now you must comply with a full section. So if you take a rooftop off, let's say you take a 5-ton rooftop off of the roof of a building and you're putting a 5-ton rooftop back, that 5-ton rooftop now not only has to meet the minimum efficiency, but it's got to have low leak dampers, it's got to have an economizer, it's got to have CO2 controls if it's a certain type of space. A lot of the bells and whistles that you could get around under the current 2013 code when you were doing a one-for-one replacement, you can't now. You have to add those things. So I give the example on the screen of a boiler, right? If you were doing a boiler project today, you could take out a 1,000,000 BTU boiler, put a 1,000,000 BTU boiler back, and you just had to meet the minimum 90, I think it was 96.2% or 92.6% efficiency. Now you have to add boiler turn down, you have to add outdoor air reset, you have to add some of these additional features that were required for new boiler systems, but were exempted under a direct replacement, are now required. Definitely a big change there for your HVAC service companies, for your fast track type projects, for, oh shoot, my unit died, I need to replace it because we're going into a holiday weekend and it's warm. You now have to look at some of these additional features that become required under this code. Trying to highlight a couple other big changes. If anybody on this call designs or builds hotels that are 50 rooms or larger, it's probably the most impacted individual building type in the entirety of this code. Hotels that are 50 rooms or larger now have to be able to monitor 3 modes. Rented, so a guest has rented the room but it isn't there, so rented and unoccupied. Unrented and unoccupied, you're trying to rent it out, or occupied. Pretty much every hotel room, as the bottom bullet point says, is going to end up with, new hotel room is going to end up with one of those key card holders that you have to put your key card into to make your HVAC system run, to recognize that it's occupied. What is also really challenging with this is to know that it is unrented and unoccupied. You now essentially have to have an integration between your hotel check-in system and your HVAC controls. You need the front desk to be able to flip something from rented to unrented and back and forth, because that's going to start defining how much your guest room ventilation can run, how much that room is set back or not, if the fan can run. There are different requirements that are all driven by rented or unrented from the front desk, and then occupied or unoccupied within the room. This is something, right? And what gets interesting with this is this is a pinch point, or this is a pivotal point that we've heard from other states. If you're going design build, or if you're a mechanical contractor, you really need to be coordinating with the electrical contractor now, because different things might signal occupancy. There might be a lighting occupancy sensor that signals that the room is occupied. There's got to be a collaboration and a communication that occurs from a requirement like this. A couple other kind of smaller changes here on the HVAC side. I love this one. I'm a big fan of this. If you have the ability for your system to humidify and dehumidify, you have to have an interlock that literally allows one or the other. An exemption to this is a hospital surgical type setting. You have the ability to humidify or dehumidify within really tight bands. That's a life safety issue and an exemption, but in general, an office building might have a humidifier and like a hot gas bypass or another way to dehumidify. They want to make sure that those are interlocked so they can't run simultaneously. I can tell you in my experience in retro commissioning and some of this work over the last couple of years, I find a lot of systems that are running simultaneous, and it's like you're heating and cooling at the same time. You're humidifying and dehumidifying. It's just a waste of energy. Another change, not all that pertinent to Michigan, but I want to bring it up in here for those that may work out of state. The last energy code, we could not actively heat a vestibule above 60 degrees. They're trying to make that a transitional space, not just part of outside or part of the building that's open outside. You can now not actively cool that below 85. Not a big issue here in Michigan. I can tell you I've been to Phoenix last summer and walked through a vestibule that was probably 130, 140 degrees because the cooling wasn't working. That's where they're trying to use some of that to manage that. So just be aware there. Another big change, this pertains to maybe if there's a manufacturer on this call or if anybody that's speccing exhaust fans. You used to spec everything on a fan efficiency grade, FEG. That essentially rating is being obsoleted. Everything will be now rated under fan energy index. So what that does, so fan efficiency grade, an FEG, really looked at the motor itself. Well, the code officials started to realize you can have a really efficient motor, but you put a terrible belt and a terrible fan blade on it. You put other components with it, you actually can lose the performance. So fan energy index, FEI, is now a measure of the entire assembly of that, the belts, the bearings, the fan blade itself, the motor. Really every manufacturer out there has recognized this now. If you go onto a Green Hack or a Cook selection software, and you pick I'm ASHRAE 90.1 2019, it's not going to spit out FEG for you anymore. It's automatically going to spit out FEI. So you're going to see changes to specs. You're going to see changes to equipment schedules to reflect this change. I think the last kind of change before we talk about some functional performance testing requirements for HVAC is occupied standby controls. I try not to bring my opinion too much into educational seminars, but if I was one of 8 advisory council members, I was trying to die on the hill of this, not having this as a requirement, but the decision was made to adopt the book as written. So in multi-zone systems, like a VAV system or a VRF system, automatic off controls need to be present. So your lighting occupancy sensor has to connect to your VAV box and set the room temperature back by a minimum of 1 degree, and it has to look at the airflow requirements. This seems like a lot of cost. This seems like a lot of headache in coordination and integration between electrical and mechanical contractors to save 1 degree. The reason that this is there, the reason that this exists, and the reason that the state chose to adopt it is because the next code edition doesn't make it 1 degree, it makes it 3 degrees. This is an incremental step that they're trying to use the lighting occupancy sensor to, my office here is, I'm not a VAV system, but let's say I was, right? Let's say I had my own zone of temperature control here. They're trying to make sure my office isn't overly heated or overly cooled if I've gone to attend a meeting and I've been gone all day. So that is what this requires. This is a huge coordination point. GCs need to be aware of, ECs and electrical and mechanical contractors, because now your electrical contractor needs to install a lighting sensor that has an additional point of contact to be able to integrate to like a VAV box. Don't shoot the messenger. I just communicate what's been adopted. Ah, I forgot about this slide. Another really big change that is really going to impact some projects here. Peter, you just asked a question about rooms that affect air change requirements. There are exemptions in the code for rooms like that have certain air change requirements. There are ways around that. So that is heavily driven around offices, schools, some of those things. So great question there. Another big change that is heavily impacting construction costs of multifamily, mixed use, senior living, biggest changes. Any non-transient dwelling. So a transient dwelling would be like a hotel, something that someone checks into, rents for a matter of days, and then checks out of. That's a transient dwelling. A non-transient dwelling would be senior living, college dorms, that somebody lives in for 9 months of the year, apartments, condos. You have to have an ERV now. Right? All of us design professionals, we used to bring some fresh air, stick it into the side of a furnace, stick it into the back of a PTAC, stick it into a magic pack, and say, hey, we're getting our fresh air requirements that way. This code does not allow that. You have to have an ERV on that fresh air and that exhaust air for a non-transient dwelling that has at least 50% energy recovery. What we are seeing, and there's only one manufacturer we found now out so far, but I've talked to a handful of others that are actively working on a magic pack, electric heat pump, these types of units that have a little miniature, a little small ERV built into the unit. So you don't have to go to a central ERV or a ceiling mounted ERV. But if you think about, even if that's a $500 add to that mechanical unit, you have 140 apartments times 500. You just added $75,000 to the construction cost of the mechanical units only for that. And now from a maintenance staff, you have something else you need to maintain. So not my favorite, but I understand they're trying to incorporate more ERVs into fresh air systems. I'm going to touch on this real briefly. A lot of unit efficiencies have changed very minorly. If you used to be 11 year, you're now 11.2 year based on size. Most of these changes, all your equipment manufacturers, your Trains, your Carriers, your Roods, your Bryant, you fill in the blank. Most of them are aware of these changes. They've been recognizing these are coming. Other states have already had these efficiency changes. So a lot of them either already complied or have a small model tweak that is available that you'll start to see. If you've bought this unit for the last 5 years, it might be a slightly different model number or a slightly different unit to meet efficiency requirements. But what we're hearing is this is not impacting equipment that much. I'm going to get back on my drum here a little bit. Functional performance testing. This is required now for any HVAC project. So if you do a full-scale building, you got to functionally test the controls, calibration of the units, all of that. But if you just do a boiler replacement project, you still have to do a scaled back functional performance test of just the boilers, right? You don't have to get into the existing systems. If you didn't touch the pumps, you don't have to touch anything existing. But if you replace equipment, you've got to have a plan to performance test that to make sure it's running the way it's supposed to. I'm going to touch on plumbing here in about, 2 slides, I think. Haven't fully understood this one. Service water heating, most design professionals, most contractors, recirculating pipe, impedance heating, heat trace, we're insulating those out of best practice, especially here in West Michigan. Code now requires you at minimum to do the first 8 feet. You have a hot water recirculation line for your domestic hot water. Most of us aren't leaving that uninsulated, but by code, you have to do the first 8 feet. This small equipment, this equipment performance that I highlight at the bottom of the slide here, the big change is the small instantaneous water heaters that you might put under a sink, that you might have put by a mop sink that's way removed in a facility. Those now aren't governed by this code. They basically have to be Energy Star. They're recognizing the as small as some of those units get for maybe an individual sink. They're treating them almost as like a residential unit. So it's a little bit of a gray area here in this code. But back to my drum, no matter what you do on the plumbing side for domestic water heating, for recirculation, for heat trace, for pool controls, all of that needs to be functionally performance tested. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to leave out where it was, but we retro commissioned a building that had been built 5 years ago, finished right before COVID. Kind of got rushed with COVID a little bit. Came in 5 years later, they couldn't figure out why their electric bills were so high. We found out that 92 kW of electric heat had been running on heat trace 24/7, 365 days a year for the last 5 years. And that's what this functional performance testing they're trying to identify. I've been in the contracting world. I've worked for a contractor. We all have deadlines. We have responsibilities. And sometimes you just spend 3 years building a building and it's hard to look at every single detail. They want somebody to come in and make sure something like 92 kW of electric heat didn't just miss a schedule, didn't just miss the outdoor temperature at which it was supposed to shut off and ended up running. I mean, we ended up finding it on a July day that had 92 kW of electric heat running on an 85-degree day. So that's why, but no temperature controls, circulation pumps, heat trace, those types of things need to be commissioned or tested for service water heating. I'm going to jump into electrical. This is the biggest change in this code, which was actually in ASHRAE 90.1 2013, but Michigan wrote an amendment and excluded this requirement. So 50% of outlets in a private office, a conference room, a break room, a classroom, modular workstations have to be controlled by occupancy. So I'm going to use my office as an example. Let's say I have 5 out. I'm going to use 6 because then I can do easier math. I have 6 outlets in this office. 3 of those outlets need to be tied to my lighting occupancy sensor. So when I leave the room, if my AirPods are charging, if I have a fan running, if I have a speaker, an Amazon speaker running, those types of things are supposed to shut off with the occupancy control. Obviously, you have constant live outlets to be able to run things like your computer and printers and these types of things. I struggle with this a little bit, right? I mean, if you put 6 outlets in an office and you tell me 3 of them, you know, my phone's going to stop charging because I walked to the bathroom for 15 minutes, I'm going to not plug my phone into it, or I'm going to get a surge strip. I'm going to run a power surge strip over to my desk so I can plug everything in. People are going to work around this one. Functional performance testing plan and documentation is going to say, hey, did I do this right? I think what we're all going to see is occupants of their space are going to find a way to work around this. What I'm also fearful of, and what I've heard from some other states, is as contractors, we all hate callbacks. And they start getting callbacks as an electrical contractor. My outlet doesn't work, or my computer won't charge. You know, must be something wrong with this outlet. I'm fearful that this requirement and enforcement of this is going to create callbacks for electrical contractors, because I'm going to plug my laptop in, I'm going to leave for a meeting, and I'm going to come back and can't figure out why my laptop didn't charge. It's because it's on a plugged into a circuit that's tied to the occupancy sensor. So I was out of the room, so my laptop didn't actually charge. It was depleting the battery the whole time. So don't shoot the messenger. Understand that this is something that's is going to be enforced and tested. Another big change, and I want to clarify this one: new buildings only. This is not a addition. This is not an alteration. This is a brand new ground up building only. Now requires whole building electrical energy monitoring. You have to have power meters either in your panel or secondarily added to monitor what your total energy use is, what your HVAC load is, what your interior lighting load is, what your exterior lighting load is, and what your receptacle load is. And if it's a process building, what your process load is. This is a mess if you don't think through initial design, right? If you approach this in the right way from the get-go, you might bring panels differently off your main distribution panel so you can put 1 meter and monitor all your HVAC from one panel. If you just start distributing power to everywhere, you got a real mess as you try to figure out what's lighting load versus what's HVAC load versus what's plug load if you just put in one panel that serves the entirety of an office. Some exemptions to this. This is the number one, right? Even if it's is it a new building? If it's a new building, is it 25,000 square feet or larger? Right? They're exempting some smaller buildings from this. They're exempting a tenant, right? So let's say you have a new building and it's got a fit out of a 15,000 square foot office floor. That's above this 10,000 square foot requirement. You've got to put in the electrical monitoring to monitor the different loads. Dwelling units are excluded. So if you build your condo building, you got to monitor the hallways off of a common house panel, but your dwelling, your condos, your apartments, your dwelling units themselves would be excluded. Residential only applies if the common area is larger than 10,000 square feet. So you build that apartment, right? And you got a small little corridor on each floor. If the combination of those corridors and maybe your mailroom and your lobby and some of that is less than 10,000 square feet, you can be exempted from this. Last thing I'll say about this, and I do appreciate it, is you can have a little bit of cross-loading, right? We all know you get to the end of a construction job and you've been out there for a year, you've wired thousands of feet of copper wire through the building, and there's one thing that you're like, oh crap, the owner wants to add an outlet here at the front. Well, the only thing I have right there is my HVAC panel. You can run a circuit to that as long as it's not more than 10% cross-loaded. And having talked to a couple code officials out in Colorado, basically what they're asking is if you're going to land a load on the wrong metered panel, they just want someone to have verified that the total load of what you're adding is not more than 10%. So it might be a quick letter, it might be a quick load calc, it might be a quick panel schedule update, but they're going to ask for verification of that. If the building requires a DDC system, which is defined by the HVAC section, if in 6.4 there's a DDC system required, then you have to have a graphical interface. We're not talking a dashboard on a TV screen in the lobby, but we are talking about maybe a web interface that someone could pull up and see the real-time energy use of those different systems and broken down by system via a web interface. If a DDC system is not required, you can get away with metering all of this with just a LCD display on your power meter that you'd have to scroll through and see your different loads. Back to my drum, functional performance testing or commissioning. You've got to test that receptacle control and you got to test that energy monitoring, right? You got to, they require these things, they're going to make sure that they are functioning in the way they're supposed to when you walk away from the project to close it out. I'm going to jump into lighting real quick, and we're going to run a couple minutes over for some Q&A, but I don't want to skip over too much of this. Lighting has not changed a whole lot. The biggest change probably to lighting is the fact that a 1-for-1 replacement under the old code used to still have to add all the lighting controls. So if I have 4 light fixtures in my office. Under the old code, if I was replacing more than 2 of them, I had to add an occupancy sensor to my office to meet the energy code. Under this code, under 2019, if I'm 1 for 1 just replacing fluorescence with LED, I do not have to add the occupancy sensor. It's the only thing in this code adoption that felt like it's a little bit of that they went backwards a little bit, but I think they're trying to recognize the 1 for 1 kind of quick energy retrofits, because they're recognizing the efficiency of LED is so improved over old fluorescent that you're getting a lot of savings out of the technology change more than you are turning a 12-watt LED off as technologies become so good. The design of lighting has changed, right? An office, you used to get 0.82 watts per square foot. You now get 0.64. Space by space, a lot of these things has changed. But this is not hard to accomplish. None of these values are difficult to hit. It's basically saying you're going to design all projects with LED going forward, which most professionals do. You really have a hard time hitting some of these dimming requirements, controls requirements, or allowable watts per square foot if you're trying to go fluorescent still. So for any ECs or electrical designers on the call, go LED, you won't have a problem. The last thing I'll mention on this is functional performance testing has not actually changed for lighting. That was the only thing under the 2013 code that Michigan didn't amend out. That was supposed to be tested for lighting controls and lighting levels. Most jurisdictions were not enforcing that. They were having a hard time saying your electrical contractor on his lighting was the only thing we're going to test. So they kind of have really let this slide for the last 6 years. There are jurisdictions, Holland Township, for example, that would request this, but most weren't. What I am anticipating, what I'm hearing from code officials now is they're saying, hey, we're going to enforce this. If we're requiring HVAC and envelope and power systems to be tested, we're going to require that the lighting gets tested as well. For the HVAC contractors on the call, air curtains actually for the last 6 years were not code allowed. There was really no data 6 years ago when we adopted that showing the effectiveness and performance of those. The only study that had ever been done was done by a manufacturer, and national code reviewers have a hard time adopting something that the manufacturer says it'll be fine, it works. These have now been independently tested and have been proven to work like we all kind of anticipated they are. So these are allowed again. Last thing I'm going to mention is whole building energy monitoring. If you're a new building, 25,000 square feet or larger, the exact same requirements that we were talking about with the electrical, you have to monitor any inbound utilities. So we've talked about electric, but if you buy gas, if you have propane, if you have you're on district steam in downtown Grand Rapids, if you're on the district geo loop, heat pump loop that's out in Holland, you have to monitor any inbound utility. So something on a new building, 25,000 square feet or larger, be aware of. You've got to monitor these, and again, have a dashboard of it or a display screen of it if you require DDC controls. Last time, I'm going to try to hit this drum today. If you have these systems, you've got to functionally performance test it or commission it. There's really not a system in here that you're not going to have to do those requirements. So kind of in summary, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. We are under ASHRAE 90.1 2013. We are going to ASHRAE 90.1 2019, which includes anything that was in ASHRAE 90.1 2016. And this is going into enforcement April 22. What I'm going to say is there are jurisdictions that have already started to give some grace periods around this, recognizing that there's changes in design, there's things that need to react to this. So City of Grand Rapids, for example, if you submit for a permit prior to April 22 with a deferred submittal, a deferred drawing for the actual completion of this, they are giving a 90-day grace period. So you can submit by April 22, and not actually submit your drawings for 3 months. Most jurisdictions, though, what we're seeing is saying, hey, if you submit for a permit after April 22, you're going to have to be held to this code. So be very aware if you're a design professional, if you're a pre-con, if you're an estimator, if you're anybody on this call, be very aware of what jurisdiction you're working in and what their requirements are relative to submittal before or after this date if you're going to have to do some of these things, because it might affect your bid, it might affect your schedule, it might affect your overall design for the project. So with that, Greg, that gets us to the end of our educational presentation today. I will open it up for Q&A.
Sean Van Haren of Van Haren Electric. You might have covered this, but who is entirely responsible for getting the functional performance testing scheduled for the inspection?
So it's actually got to, John, that's a great question. It has actually got to be done prior to calling in your inspection. So it's not by the inspector itself, it's by either your third party or Sean, let's say you have Van Haren do the design and you have somebody else test it. That's got to be completed and done, and kind of the compliance form is supposed to be provided to the code official when they do their final inspection. So in terms of scheduling, it's either going to be yourself, the EC, as the contractor, to make sure you've got that plan before you call in your final inspection. And I would also assume on some larger projects that the GC in OAC calls is going to start coordinating. Hey, we're getting to final inspections, we're getting to project closeout. Where is every contractor at with their performance testing or commissioning requirements? So there's not a defined who's responsible for that. It's really going to follow the contractor, the GC, or if an independent party has been hired throughout the process, they should be the ones managing, hey, have you gotten this done prior to calling in your final inspections?
As a follow-up to that, as the electrical designer, there's a form I'm supposed to fill out before the plan review then?
Yes, ASHRAE does provide some forms. If you go into the ASHRAE, if you purchase the ASHRAE user manual, there'll be some forms in there. I will not make this a sales pitch, but I will say that there are other organizations that have developed those, and we are offering them as like a subscription. So, you know, if you get, hey, we got to update this, or we got to do something that we haven't done before, there are people building libraries that you can subscribe to and just have all those forms available. Yep. We had one pop up here, Nate Howard on the chat. How will the new 2021 Michigan Commercial Energy Code come to play on this? Will inspectors be enforcing based on ASHRAE or the Michigan Mechanical Code Book? So the answer will be they will be enforcing on both, right? When you pull a mechanical permit, you will have to be compliant with both the mechanical code and the energy code. So I think there's still inspectors trying to work through if there's any contradictions, but to your question, Nathan, for a permit and an inspection, you will be enforced to both code books, because energy is a lot around the efficiency, some of the bells and whistles of the equipment, some of that stuff. How it's installed is often covered by more of the mechanical, or it's defining the ventilation requirements, some of those things. So it is not an either or, it is an and. It is you will be enforced to both code books. Great question though. Any others hanging out there? I know I talked a lot. I'm sure some of you are diving into this. So is there any others hanging out there?
I can take that one if you want. We've recorded it, Stephen, and we're gonna send it out to every attendee and anyone that registered. So you'll have access to the presentation in a follow-up as soon as it processes and I get it uploaded and we get it emailed out. But you'll be receiving it if you whoever registered and attended the event.
Yep. Additionally, the scan me that I have up on the screen right now will bring you to a spot on our website. We do offer lunch and learns. So we've done, I was joking with Greg before we started. I think this is the 12th or 13th time I've presented on this in about the last month and a half. What we've had happen at other instances too is one or two people from an organization attends a webinar like this and they say, hey, can you come talk to our entire pre-con team? We do offer that as well as being on that code advisory council and representing construction around West Michigan. Really the more we can educate people on this, the better it is for the industry as a whole. So if you want to scan the QR code, or my email and cell are on here too, if you want to reach out with questions. Obviously, we're not going to get into design for you necessarily, but if you're like, hey, can you help me understand, would I be required on this? Please reach out. I'd rather answer questions than have somebody feel like they're fumbling through this on their own.